And the whole idea of being strategic is recognizing that we have limited resources and we have a purpose. And so we have to align our resources to our purpose because, again, John chapter 15, verse 8, you can tell if you're a disciple by your fruitfulness. And I think that applies to me personally, but it also applies to us corporately, applies to our ministries, applies to your parish. And so you better know what fruit looks like. We know what busyness looks like. In that same chapter, it talks about the vine and the branches and the fruit. And so often people talk about, I say, hey, how things at your church? Oh, man, we're busy. And they talk about all the ways they're busy. And it's like, those are the branches. What fruit is becoming? Have you made any new disciples?
So that's a problem then in terms of PPC and leadership team, pastoral council and leadership team, that you don't want to be just handing over things to keep people busy. It needs to be real things that will align with your purpose and help you achieve that.
Welcome to the Huntley Leadership Podcast, helping leaders be a positive catalyst in the people they support, the organizations they serve, and the communities they live. This podcast will make you think, laugh, and grit your teeth with new determination to make your parish or business a place of transformation, passion, and purpose. If you're still breathing, you are powered for impact. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Leadership Podcast. It's Lorraine and I are so glad to be here talking to you about a very important topic, which is parish pastoral councils and leadership teams. How do they play together anyway? It can be incredibly confusing, and I'm thinking this episode is specifically geared towards churches that are trying to be missional. In other words, trying to make new Christians, trying to make a difference, trying to push back the cultural pressure and the things that are causing churches to shrink and be irrelevant in so many people's lives. If that's your goal, if that's your heart, if that's the trajectory you're on, then you're probably thinking about or already leading out of a team, in which case this podcast is going to be so helpful for you. And so welcome to the show and thanks for coming back. Lorraine, what's your perspective? Like, do you see this stuff? Do you hear this stuff in terms of leadership team, parish pastoral council?
Absolutely. It's funny you should mention that, Ron, because just this week I've been in contact with two parishes and they were both asking the same question. One of the parishes I was working with, they've had a PPC for a fair while and they're just in the process of forming a senior leadership team. And they're trying to work out what does the PPC do and what does the senior leadership team do. And the PPC is actually a little bit cross or put off a bit or feeling unvalued because the priest in that parish has decided to get this leadership team together. And then another parish that I was speaking to, they've had their senior leadership team for a while and they've been asked by their diocese to form a parish pastoral council. And they don't really know what they're going to get the parish pastoral council to do. So it just seems to me that it's an area that we're all a little bit confused about maybe. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, and it's funny, like, Ron, like, why haven't you done a podcast like this before? Because it's an issue. It's like, I don't know, I like to avoid it as much as the rest of you, but it really is an important conversation. You know, when you talk about that first group, well, actually, both those scenarios are so cool because the first group is like, well, aren't we good enough? Like, haven't we done a good enough job? Like, don't we matter? And so I get it. That would be hurtful. And then the other folks are like, what? Like, are we just doing this for a token to please the bishop? Like, oh, this is so unnecessary. And so the more clarity we bring to today's episode, I think, is going to help a lot of people. And as we share this, I just want you to know, if you're listening to this, we don't have all the answers, but we certainly have opinions. And so we're going to share some thoughts and perspective with you from our experiences. But it doesn't mean that you don't come up with better ideas. And so this will help the conversation, but, you know, please don't beat your priest up or your bishop up with this, say, well, that's what Ron and Lorraine said, because listen, we have to figure this stuff out together. You know your context, you know your people, and so take this conversation into that perspective and trust your leadership. You know, so I'd just say that as a starting point. So, yeah. Yeah.
So what do you think the source of the confusion is, Ron? Like, there's obviously confusion around. We agree about that. But what's the source of it?
I think you brought up something, it's new. Like the whole idea of working out of a leadership team is new. Yeah, I remember years ago working with a pastor, and he would travel, and every time he'd come home, he'd have new ideas, and the staff was already working like crazy to bring about the ideas, and we had a Parish Pastoral Council at the time, and he'd come up with new ideas, and it would just cause chaos and disorder when he'd bring these new ideas. And I remember saying to him at one point, "Who are your people? Like, it can't be all these international people, so every time you hear a good idea or read a good book, you just insert it into what we're already doing. It doesn't work. It's discouraging. It's disheartening. You need a group of people around you that care about this parish and the vision as much as you do, so that you can discern these ideas, not just inflict them on everybody because it's causing disengagement." And it took several years before that actually came to pass. But if you're not doing that, it makes it really hard. But I guess part of the confusion is it's new. And so when something's new, it's like, well, what do we do with this? It's like you bring a little kitten home to your 10-year-old dog, and it looks at this kitten and says, "What the heck is this? What am I supposed to do with this?" And in many ways, that's how the leadership team can feel in a parish that has a Parish Pastoral Council. It's like, why?
Why?
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, we're trying to be, John chapter 15, verse 8, "You can tell you're my disciple by your fruitfulness." Are we fruitful? My wife, Nicole, converted to Catholicism, and we travel all around the world. And she came into the church through St. Benedict Parish, and the lively music, the great homilies, the incredible hospitality, the vibrant ministry, a roadmap for evangelization, next steps. And so she thought that was normal. And then we travel all over the world and go to these churches, and she's literally broke down in tears sometimes because it feels so dead. And my heart breaks. And she didn't know that all churches weren't vibrant, amazing, fun, hospitable, and open to new people. And in fact, I would say the opposite is true. And so why do we want a leadership team? Because we're not as fruitful as we know we should be. And you know that. Like if you're listening to this and you have an ache in your heart because you know full well your church isn't what it could be, then you know what I'm talking about. So how do you get from where you're at now to where you know God's calling you to be? And it's not going to be this Lone Ranger priest mentality. And, if any of you are listening to this and been on a Parish Pastoral Council before, you know how ineffective and a waste of time they are a lot of the times. Now, I'm not saying all the time, but we want to help you with this episode have effective Parish Pastoral Council meetings and teams. But let's be honest. Like, I don't know, Lorraine, have you ever been on a Parish Pastoral Council that stunk?
Yeah, one or two.
Yeah, there you go. And so it's like, this is a ginormous waste of time. And so I think every single group, every single meeting in every single church should be amazing, useful, and purposeful. And if it's not, we have to hit the pause button and figure it out. So the whole idea of a leadership team is, can we lead? Is there a model of leading differently that's more effective? I said in the podcast the other day that where you are in 5 years is a direct correlation between the decisions you make between now and then. And the better the quality of the decisions you make between now and then, the better the trajectory is for where your church is going to be and the impact it's going to be having. And so leadership teams allow you to help surround the pastor with a diversity of strengths and gifts, but a unanimity in vision, and help that pastor make decisions in the minutia of the day-to-day, the week-to-week. Because I'll tell you, these pastors get decision fatigue. They have people coming at them from all angles. They're absolute heroes. And in many ways, it's an unwinnable role in the current format. And leadership teams help them be more effective, more consistently. It brings competency and momentum to decision making and releasing people to do the things they're called to do. And so I would say that's the heart of why. Now, if you're a Parish Pastoral Council, why are you there? Like if you're a member, why are you there? And both of the Parish Pastoral Council and the leadership team were there to support the pastor, to bring about a God-sized vision to impact the world, or certainly the world around you. That's why we're there. if you're there to control your pastor or to influence him because you don't like the decisions he makes, and then I get that. But that's not the purest motive. It's probably not the best scenario, probably not going to create the best meetings. It means we have low trust, where we don't like, we have different preferences, we haven't rallied around mission or vision. We're rallying around preferences and trying to control people or influence, and it's just not the best model. So there can be mixed reasons why we come on these things, but what I tell both of those groups, if they're healthy, if we're striving for health, you don't even have to be healthy now. If you long for health, then we have to check our motivations and our desires, and we have to say, why do we exist? We exist to support. And I would suggest that if it's done well, the Parish Pastoral Council sees itself as a team to love and support the pastor, his leadership team, and the staff. To support the pastor, his leadership team, and the staff. Oftentimes, in my opinion, if you're a missional church and your leadership team is doing a great job and your Parish Pastoral Council exists, the people on the leadership team are also on the Parish Pastoral Council. So the decisions that are being made form each other.
So this SLT would mostly, in a good scenario, be going along to the PPC meetings.
Yes. So when you say SLT, for those listening, that's senior leadership team or leadership team, we'll use those. That's okay. We'll use those interchangeably. I just didn't want to lose anybody. But yeah, and so, in your leadership teams, you have ones that are made up of entirely volunteers, which is great. Sometimes you have it made of entirely staff, which is lovely. And sometimes there's a mix, and it's okay. Whatever the scenario is, doesn't matter. It works in all scenarios and all situations. There's just different considerations. But that's an important piece. And then if you have a well-functioning leadership, because a lot of churches, Parish Pastoral Council functions the people that get everything done. I mean, not only do they help the pastor make pastoral decisions or certainly advise on pastoral decisions, but they're also the very people that get their hands dirty and get things done out of the Parish Pastoral Council, which means that's your organizational structure. Those are your key ministers. And that's a model of Parish Pastoral Council, and that's okay if you don't have staff or you don't have a well-designed structure for ministry. But if you do have a well-designed structure for ministry, then that's not a very good rule. Then that becomes meddling. And I often say in a missional parish, if you have a leadership team and a Parish Pastoral Council, I say to the Parish Pastoral Council, I hope you don't see this as your primary ministry, because it isn't. You're only an effective Parish Pastoral Council member to the degree that you're fully engaged in the life of the church, which means serving in ministry, whether you're leading it or just serving it. That's what makes your opinion valuable on the Parish Pastoral Council. But if you're just coming here as a wise expert, I don't know that you need one of those in a missional church that has a functional leadership team and a Parish Pastoral Council. It's a lighter touch role. I would suggest that, they'd probably want to meet like once a quarter for a couple hours. And, maybe you're listening to this and go, how could we possibly do what we've done meeting once a quarter? Well, you're probably not going to do what you've always done. And so there's going to be a bit of letting go. We have to hold on to our roles in the church with light hands instead of white knuckles. Because we're there to serve. And I see people sometimes, you're not getting me out of this. This is what I do. And it's like, oh, wow, that's awful. I get it, but maybe you should pray a little bit on that. Because I want to play whatever role required to be as fruitful as possible to reach those that don't know Jesus yet, to bring them home. This isn't a club. I don't want to bring an entitlement attitude to ministry or roles. And oftentimes in leadership teams where pastors change, I tell the leadership team, you're not owed your position on leadership team. It's not a position of honor and authority. You're there because it makes sense right now for that pastor. So give the other pastor, tell him you'll serve with him for a year while he discerns, help that transition, but he'll need to discern his own people. Maybe he'll be one of them, but maybe you won't, and it's okay. Because you weren't brought on to the parish staff or what have you, or because your role on leadership team. It's because your role in the other area that you serve in. And so the same thing is true with the Parish Pastoral Council. Like, we need a servant attitude, and we need to hold on to our position with light hands. And we need to take an attitude of service and collaboration, not I've got to be heard. We need to be heard. If those are issues that you're facing, you deal with those. But so what's the cause? I think newness. I think fear. And I think, sometimes holding on to an understanding of how to lead the church that from an era that we know doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And so stop it. If it doesn't work, stop it. And here's the thing too, experiment, trial. Like if we're going to move into a situation where there's a leadership team and there's a Parish Pastoral Council, it doesn't have to be forever. Like just why are you doing it? We want to get better results. Well, that's a great motive. We want to have more impact. That's an awesome motive. We want to support people better. Terrific. Well, then let's try it and let's define how are we going to know it's working? How are we going to know it's not working? So that you can adjust in real time. And if it doesn't work, go back to the way you did it before. Like it doesn't have to be forever. But we also don't have to keep doing what we've done in the past forever if it's not working.
So it could look really different between different parishes, do you think?
I think what could look different is who's on the leadership team. So why a leadership team anyway? So a leadership team, again, to surround the pastor to make better decisions more consistently, but also to provide personal relational support to other ministry leaders and structures within your church so that people can thrive. Like leadership is the gift when done properly allows all the other gifts to flourish. I love that concept. And so we're not telling people what to do as if they're not very intelligent. We're actually unleashing them. We're bringing them closer to Jesus, and we're asking them, what do you see as possible in your ministry? If your ministry is wildly successful, what kinds of things would you do differently? How could you create more faith in your ministry group? How can you grow friendships in your ministry group? How can you know what I mean? So it's all of a sudden they're taking ownership of their ministry, and they're driving it forward with a vision that's aligned with the culture you want to create in your church. But that takes unleashing, and it takes support. Not just telling people what to do.
And I like that word support rather than representation, because I think often in our parishes, in both pastoral councils and on leadership teams, people see themselves as representing the interests of a particular ministry or group of people, whereas you're using the word support, and that's much more relational, and it kind of tips the leadership pyramid up the other way, doesn't it? So that if I'm not representing, the youth ministries or the family ministries, I'm supporting them. So I'm trying to get to know the people that are the ministry leads, and as you say, unleashing and, finding out what their goals and dreams and things are, and bringing issues that they have back to the leadership team, which is really different to representing, isn't it? And kind of almost having a tussle between different people.
It's true. It's almost like there's only 8 pieces of pie, so I better get my 2 for my team and to heck with you guys.
Or
it's
the
like
funds or something.
or the money. And let's face it, we do have limited resources. But what we're trying to do, whether we're on the Parish Pastoral Council leadership team, is we're trying to prioritize our energy, efforts, resources, and human resources in line with priorities that will help us move towards a desired outcome. And so we better know what success looks like, because if we don't define that, then anything will do. And then your lobbyists come and they just get their piece and they've made their constituents happy. That's not what we're trying to do in a missional church. We're trying to break down those divisions by prayerfully discerning. And that's what a Parish Pastoral Council is meant to do. It's meant to pastorally give insight and advice to the pastor and his team. And so there's a degree of wisdom there, and there's also a degree of letting go, so that we can do this together. We can discern God's will together for this parish, where we're going, and the culture we want to have. Sometimes we can treat people really horribly in the name of lobbying for a particular group, but we're not lobbyists. We're a family of faith. Now, I say that. You might be saying, not my church isn't a family of faith. And I get it. I belong to churches. It doesn't feel like a family at all. It's just a bunch of strangers who happen to be baptized Catholic. So we go to church because our mothers told us we should, and we don't feel one bit connected. It's like that's most of the churches I've been in as I grew up. So I know what that feels like, but that's not the goal, and we all know it. And so that's where Alpha is such an important piece, because unless you know people's stories and fall in love with them, the church is never going to feel like a family of faith. Unless we absolutely, I think that's one of the things that makes families so beautiful and close. They eat together so many times throughout the course of their lifetime. Well, Alpha, you eat together 11 weeks in a row. You go on a retreat together and you discuss Jesus and things that matter in such a way that you actually feel like you know somebody probably better than you know your friends you grew up with your whole life. And that changes the water on the beans. And so if you don't have platforms like that within your church while you're trying to be effective, you're not going to be effective, because you're going to be trying to be effective on ideas, not relationships. Jesus changed the world based on amazing friendships, amazing relationships, not good ideas. He didn't write a book and say you should go to university and study this stuff. He created a group of friends, and he formed them and sent them and let them make mistakes. Sent them out before they were ready. They learned that, hey, we actually can do this stuff, and he journeyed with them, and that's, I think, what we all long for, but we don't necessarily know how to do it. And so parish pastoral councils should see, I'd encourage you to see the pastor as your friend, not somebody that needs to be controlled. Now, I say that, I don't know your pastor. You might be going, yeah, you don't know my pastor. He's a jerk. Somebody's got to keep him in line, in which case you're probably right. I don't know. But imagine if that wasn't the case. And imagine if we as pastors would submit ourselves to those relationships, make sure we're surrounding ourselves by wise people who share a vision. We might have a different way of approaching strategy and tactics, but that's where the best ideas come from, is those differences.
So it's important then that the PPC and the Pastoral Council and the leadership team share a common vision.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
100%. And that's the part of the pastor's role that you got to figure that stuff out.
Yeah, because I've been in parishes or worked with parishes where the leadership team is a new one, and they're very involved in becoming a missional parish and doing a lot of work there. And the pastoral council is something that's been there for a long time, and they've got a really different idea because it's always the way that they've done things. And so sometimes that's a bit of conflict because the leadership team is going in a direction that the pastoral council doesn't really understand or is necessarily on board with. So how do you do that then? How do you get them together to be rowing in the same direction?
Yeah, I think there's a podcast we've done too on vision throughout your whole churk, like how do you speak vision into everything? And it's a really good podcast to process that thinking. But at the end of the day, a vision isn't a plan. And so often we go to the what and the how. And so then we disagree and we fight, but we don't spend enough time on the where and the why. So let me break that down. Where are we trying to go anyway? You know what? Here's what I feel like. I've watched so many of my friends and their families peel away from the church. I watch people bring their kids just to receive the sacraments with no intention at all of coming back. And then they're getting lost in sex and drugs and university. They lose their faith and parents stop coming. Nobody seems to care. And it's like, I don't know how that makes you feel. And I'm not saying you should feel any different than you feel now. I just want to tell you how I feel. I feel so broken up about that. Like, I just think we have let these people down so bad as the church. And I used to blame everybody else. I used to blame the priests, the bishops, the pope, the DREs, the social pastoral associates. It was everybody's fault. I was a wonderful critic until Jesus himself said, Ron, what have you ever done for my church? And I went, basically not much. And I realized I was part of the problem. Like, if I'm having those struggles and those frustrations, maybe that's a gift from God saying, Ron, I need you in the game, but like, don't just sit there and tear everybody apart. Not helpful. You're part of the problem. And so I swore I'd never be a part of the problem again. But the whole idea of working together and collaborating together, like, where are we going with that? I just lost my train of thought.
Yeah, well, we're talking about vision and how important it is for SLT, the leadership team and the pastoral council to kind of be rowing in the same direction, really. Yeah,
Right.
and that vision you were saying with your story of the families and things where we're just not bringing people into the church. I mean, that's the passion, isn't it? That's what we want. We want to be reaching those people in our families, a church that matters. And so we need to have that heart in our leadership team and in our pastoral council that keeping the main thing, I think the saying is, isn't it? And if we can both do that,
Stephen Covey.
We're heading in the same direction, aren't we? But then there becomes the allocation of tasks and what we're each going to do, doesn't it?
But don't go there too fast. Well, not you, but people. Don't go there too fast, because at the end of the day, if that's my vision and passion, and you're like, no, actually, I just want to be buried in this church, and I need it to be alive. It's like, not good enough. And it's like, what do you care about that goes beyond yourself? And if we can't agree, we might not be a good fit. If you're here just to lobby for the Filipino group, it's like not good enough. If you're just here to lobby for the people that built this church 50 years ago, not good enough. We need a vision that goes beyond ourselves, that moves us at the core of our being, that we're willing to do anything to get from being borderline useless in today's culture to absolutely contagious and changing lives. That's vision. And it's not a vision statement. It's vision. It's what drives you. That's not a plan. It's vision. And if we can't agree on that, no sense moving to the what and the how. That's dangerous as heck. That is dangerous as heck, because now we're going to fight on just about everything, because we're literally not. If that does not move you, then we shouldn't be on this team together. And if you're the pastor, you have to figure that out, bud. Like, that's your responsibility. And sometimes the thing can be, well, I'm only here for a little while. I'm just here to serve the people, and whatever they want is what they get. It's like, okay, well, good luck. Like, this podcast isn't for you. Like, you have to be all in on what God is calling you to do in your leadership, in that parish, in this season. That's the only reason this podcast makes any sense. And if that's not your perspective, this isn't helpful at all. But if that is your perspective, then what's your gut churning up? And share it. Get in touch with it and share it. And when you're inviting people to be a part of the team, vision is a differentiator as whether or not it's a good fit. I remember starting a soccer team years ago when I was just after university, and I hadn't played for years, but I used to be pretty competitive. And so I got a group of my friends together. Half of them never played soccer before. They're just really fun to have around. And a couple of them were university soccer players, and they were amazing. And I knew why I wanted to play soccer. I wanted to play soccer because it's fun. I love the exercise. I love to compete. And I thought it'd be a great way to spend my summer. But that's it. I didn't have any grand illusions we were going to win. Now, you know how hard it was for those university players to play in a team of misfits? It was hard because they were there to win, but that wasn't the vision of the team. And if it was, that we were 10 years away from that vision, or at least a good 5. And so we would have had to adjust, they had to adjust their expectations. We had to get on the same page. And so it's a little bit like that with Parish Pastoral Council. Like, are we on the same page? Because if we're not, when we go to the what and the how, you're going to be really frustrated. And so that's why vision is so important. And that's why getting people with a similar vision is so important. And if I could give one tip for pastors and Parish Pastoral Council members, if you have a Parish Pastoral Council, then I would suggest as a pastor, you meet with that chair of that Parish Pastoral Council once a month, one-on-one. And I would be asking the chair not just to run the meeting, but to own the team culture, own the team's unanimity of vision, own the team's struggles that people are having with one thing or another, own the questions they have, so that when we go to leadership team meetings, there is unity, there is goodwill, people are ready for the meeting. Don't put that on your pastor. He doesn't have time. But oftentimes we don't. People are underinvested on that team, and the chair just thinks they run the meeting. That's not actually very helpful, and we all know it. Own the team. Own the team's chemistry, own the team's passion. When people own the relationships, so that when we get to those Parish Pastoral Council members, we're not laying on the table all these beefs and these underlying currents of discontent, and the poor pastor, what's he supposed to do? it's not very supportive. But I don't think people have seen that as their role as the chair of the pastoral council. And so if I'm the pastor and you're the chair of the pastoral council and we meet once a week or once a month, I'm saying, Lorraine, what's going well with your team? Where are you excited? How have you invested in them this past month? As we prepare for our meeting next month, what are some of the things that you're hearing or feeling or sensing that are going to be important to the team? What can we bring to the table as a pastor and leadership team to bring them up to speed? And we're going to plan, we're going to coordinate together so that we're meeting the needs of the team, so that we're collaborating, so people feel like it was a worthwhile meeting, they feel heard, we're giving them what they need, but you're owning the relationship. So I don't want to come to a meeting as a pastor and you have Betty on the pastoral council, and every time she comes, she just gives it to us about one thing or another. We never know what it's going to be, but she couldn't be more discontent. And then everybody looks at me because I'm the one who's supposed to handle it. It's like, well, first of all, I'm saying to you in the next meeting, Lorraine, I'm tired of hearing from Betty with her bad attitude and her accusations. It's not helpful. It's not healthy. I need you to talk to her because she's your team member. And I need you to get to the bottom of the heart of her discontent and see if we can bring some healing and help there, because there's obviously something wrong. And she keeps bringing it to the meetings and railroading the meetings. Can you do that? Like, it's your responsibility. I need you to own your team and the relationships, the attitudes, the vision, the uncertainty, everything else. They would just be so helpful for everybody. And some people need to be removed. Don't put terms on Parish Pastoral Council's service because you're too afraid to deal with the people who are toxic. Deal with toxicity instantly or pretty close, like really quickly, and try to bring healing to that person, and or maybe remove them if they're just too broken to be on a team in a way that's healthy, because we need healthy meetings.
Mm-hmm. So what are some good examples that you've seen of what PPCs do compared to what leadership teams do?
Again, one of the funnest projects we ever worked on was, and the Parish Pastoral Council with the leadership team worked, or no, we didn't even have a leadership team at the time. The Parish Pastoral Council with the pastor worked on our vision statement, which was fine. It was great. And I got brought into it from time to time. But then when we created a leadership team, we worked together with the Parish Pastoral. Well, we were on the Parish Pastoral Council at that point. We were asked by the pastor to come to the meetings. I didn't want to go because of my past experience at Parish Pastoral Councils, but the chair, Eileen, was just amazing. And together, they put together meetings I couldn't wait to go to. And they were so fun and engaging. And the project that I found most exciting was our 5-year plan. And so we had the vision, right? And so that was great. And so now we're developing the plan, the pastoral plan, not the minutiae of the execution. That was going to be left up to the staff and the volunteers. But we are putting together a plan, and the plan was based on the 5 systems out of Rick Warren's book, Purpose-Driven Church. And so fellowship, discipleship, worship, evangelization, and ministry or service. Yeah. And so what Eileen did is she divided, like the staff, like me, I was director of evangelization at the time. She gave me the evangelization plan and a strategy to go talk to people who are engaged in that and interested in that, and just collaborate together to come up with a 5-year plan, goals and structure and money needed and everything. It was really cool. And so we did, and it was really fun project to do. It was a big project. We did a lot of work between meetings.
Yes.
We only met every quarter or every couple of months, but it didn't mean we weren't working between those meetings. And we'd come back and present. And it was really fun to do. One of the things we noticed when we sent people away to do fellowship or worship, they didn't have the same definition that we had. And so we realized we made a big mistake because they spent all this time working on the wrong thing because we didn't have the same definition of the word and the same understanding of what the word meant. And it's like, whoa, that was a big learning. But as we developed that 5-year plan, we all became vision carriers of where we wanted to go as a church. And then once that was, and we set goals around it. And it was really funny because it was like we were all drinking too much when we set those goals. It was like an auction. It's like, how many people do you think we can put through Alpha in 5 years? Well, I think we can put 1,000. 1,000? We can do better than that. Okay, 2,000. 2,000? If we can do 2, we can do 3. And the numbers are just ridiculous. Like, I looked at that plan 2 years later and I thought, what were we thinking? Like, it's not even close. But it's okay, because we understood the intent behind where we wanted to go, and we were willing to align our staffing structure to get from here to there, even if the goals we set were too high. If we got anything on those goals, it was more than most churches would have ever gotten. And we did. And so that purpose was really good. But I have to be honest, there were different seasons where the Parish Pastoral Council's purpose ceased to exist and the meetings became a real drag. And so there would be updates from the parish or the leadership team, who were at that time also on the staff. And so that was helpful. It was nice. We prayed together and we interceded together, which is really important, really good. So updates, prayer, intercession, but no purpose for the leadership team members. And so there's been different times where that Parish Pastoral Council just paused because we didn't want to waste people's time. These are good people and they're heavily involved in ministry. But there just wasn't a need for that ongoing meetings if there wasn't a purpose. And so then it would get reignited from time to time because there was other things we might be able to work on that the staff and the leadership team didn't have time for. And so that was helpful. But I appreciated the honesty of discernment of whether or not we're wasting people's time. And so it's really important to have a purpose. And so, when it comes to task, 5-year plan is really exciting. I think updates are helpful. Some of the things I heard sometimes, well, isn't it good to have a parish pastoral council so that you get the pulse of what's going on in the church? And I would say I love that you value wanting to have a pulse of the church, but what are you doing that you don't have a pulse of the church? Like, aren't you as staff and leadership team members or key volunteers, aren't you engaged in the life of the church? Aren't you doing the very things you're asking other people to do? Because if you're not, well, that's an absolute tragedy. That's a bigger problem. But we should have the pulse of the church. And not that we can't have other opinions, but we should be getting them all the time. So, for example, I was doing Alpha. I was supporting the Alpha team. I was going to the leadership summits. I was in a Connect group. I was in a discipleship group. And so there are all kinds of places where I couldn't have been more engrossed in all kinds of different relationships. I was there every weekend at Mass, and I was there at the missions that we'd have. And so you're constantly talking to people and connecting with people. And so why does the Parish Pastoral Council exist? I'd say the 5-year plan is really good. You might be able to do things like focus groups. Like, there's a lot of churches where immigration is significant, and it's like, do you understand that demographic that are moving into your area and the things they're facing, not only from their culture, but even as immigrants? And if the answer is no, and it's okay, man, wouldn't it be cool to have focus groups? Well, maybe you don't have time. Maybe that's a project that the Parish Pastoral Council can take on, and you can come up with some learnings and really try to love and meet those people where they're at, to bless the daylights out of them as a church. Or maybe just focus groups from time to time just to get different perspectives. And so there are things they can do, but they need to be specific, they need to be purposeful, and they need to be useful, not just make work projects. And it's okay to pause a Parish Pastoral Council from time to time if all the other functions in your church are working so well that it seems like it's not quite as needed right now.
So that can come in and out a little bit.
I think so. Lorraine, I want to ask you a question. You mentioned that, what about that's a really fun question, but I'm interested in how you'd answer it. When it comes to, we have a leadership team, and now the bishop wants us to have a parish pastoral council. What are your thoughts on that?
That is a hard one. And the parish that asks that question is really struggling with what they're going to do with that. So the way they're looking at it is that they've got a lot of people moving into their area. It's a parish that went down a lot over COVID, and people are coming back, but there's also people moving into the area. And so I think they're thinking that the PPC, the Pastoral Council, can be something that can maybe look at, the broadening needs of the parish, because they have a pastoral plan in that parish. They have a vision. They have a lot of that work already done that's been done over the last couple of years. Yes. But they're hoping that the Pastoral Council will be another layer, a helpful layer that will support what they're doing, and maybe even, as you say, do some projects like having a look at the new people moving in, having a look at some of the facilities in the parish, not, and that's operations often, but also having a look at where they might want to go in terms of a new building or changing some of what they've already got to better suit the changing needs of the parish. I think somebody said something about new parents moving into the area and a play group, and what might that look like. So they're thinking maybe doing some research around the types of play groups that parishes can run, the types of, and what might we want to do here that will meet the needs. So that kind of thing, which is more research, I guess, isn't it? And
it is.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, I'm glad you brought up playgroup, and it might mean something different in Australia than it does here in Canada. But, that's a perfect example. Like, everybody has ideas. Like, no churches are short on ideas, and nobody's short on opinions on what the church should be doing. And so one of the hardest things as a leadership team is to filter ideas. Like I always say, good ideas or the leadership team is where good ideas go to die. We need great ideas, not good ideas, because we only have a limited amount of resources and time. And a play group, I have no idea how that's on track with the mission and purpose of the church. Now, I hope, you know what I mean? And so, like, we have a purpose, and it is to bring people into a profound and intimate relationship with Jesus Christ. And yes, it means serving the poor and meeting real needs, but don't disconnect meeting real needs with bringing people to Jesus. And if it's and I see people do this, they take time, resources, space for things that have, and in one sense you could say, well, that's pre-evangelization. Is it?
I tell you what, in our parish it is.
Well,
we've had the most amazing playgroup. They have this, they have a prayer time, and it's and they bring along the mums, and the mums are learning how to pray with their children. And it's been a bit of a conduit into RCIA, actually. So very intentional.
Well, see, now that's where the definition of playgroup is so important. Because if you said that in Canada, that would be like, yeah, let's just have a space where a bunch of moms can bring their kids, drink coffee, and let their kids play. But that's not what you're doing. You guys are very intentional about making that a prayerful space where anyone is welcome, and then equipping them to be great moms and bring faith to their kids. That's where the definition is so important, because then I hear play group, I'm like, what? That's like a card group. And not that play and cards aren't fun, but how does it link to the mission? And that clearly does. And so, yeah, that's cool. Because again, just the whole idea, if my definition was right, which it clearly wasn't, but it's like, well, we have to discern ideas, because people are going to get you busy as a pastor and as a staff and as volunteers doing the wrong things with good intent, get you busy doing the wrong things. And that's why it's really important to be clear on your vision and your purpose, because you do have limited resources. And the whole idea of being strategic is recognizing that we have limited resources and we have a purpose. And so we have to align our resources to our purpose, because again, John chapter 15, verse 8, you can tell if you're a disciple by your fruitfulness. And I think that applies to me personally, but it also applies to us corporately, applies to our ministries, applies to your parish. And so you better know what fruit looks like. We know what busyness looks like. In that same chapter, it talks about the vine and the branches and the fruit. And so often people talk about, I say, hey, how are things at your church? Oh man, we're busy. And they talk about all the ways they're busy. And it's like, those are the branches. What fruit is becoming? Have you made any new disciples? New disciples? We got 3 people in the RCIA this year. That's awesome. How many of them didn't come in through marriage? Well, actually, they all came in through marriage. Okay. So you've evangelized nobody this year. It's okay. But boy, that's a problem.
So that's a problem then in terms of PPC and leadership team, pastoral council and leadership team, that you don't want to be just handing over things to keep people busy. It needs to be real things that will align with your purpose and help you achieve that.
Absolutely.
Help you achieve fruitfulness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where in the churches that we coach, like oftentimes they'll already have a parish pastoral council, but there's times, like you say, they have a leadership team, but not a parish pastoral council. And I can think of a church that they do really well to have a parish pastoral council because their leadership team is a little bit disconnected. And so the pastors focus on that. They become his work group. And it's like, I think a parish pastoral council would be really helpful for that leadership team so they could speak into them, because that's the danger of a leadership team. And I think that's the fear people might have a leadership team, is that group gets too insular and they're not hearing.
Yes.
And again, I'm hoping they're really connected into the life of the church, so that's less of a problem. But that's not always the case. And so parish pastoral council can be really helpful, a sober second opinion on things to help you see what you're not seeing, because you guys are talking the same language, having a lot of meetings, so your friendship is growing, your language is growing, you're forming each other in what you're seeing and what you're doing, and you're getting too focused to the point where you're losing touch. And so parish pastoral council, again, if that's their purpose, it's really great to define that. Hey guys, we have the same vision. Here's our fear. Here's what we want to do and how often we want to meet, so that you guys can give us some feedback and perspective. And as good ideas come out of that, we just want to make sure we're always in touch. And so that's why we want to gather you guys together, because we care about you. We trust your opinion. We know you love us and support us. And we just need to make sure that we don't get so focused that we lose sight of things that are important, and we need your help for that. Well, that's a purpose. All of a sudden, if you ask me to be that guy on your team, it's like, yeah, I could do that because I care about you, right? And so that would be a great purpose for this folks that don't have a parish pastoral council yet, because getting them busy for busy's sake just creates more work for everybody. And there's very few churches that need more work. Oftentimes they're overworked. They might not be doing the right things, or they might not be doing things that are actually fruitful. And maybe that's a role that parish council can play. Maybe they can study some churches that are relatively the same size, maybe the same type of financial area, so that you can see, our church is doing it better than us. And if so, how? What are they doing? How did they get there? Like, do some research and then come back and meet with the pastor and the leadership team and say, here's some of the things we're learning. We're not telling you what to do, but we're just sharing. Because again, hopefully the pastor and leadership team are asking. It's like, how can we grow? Figure out, in the next couple of years, what conferences do we want to go to? What books we want to read? And so maybe they'll come up with some ideas and why. Here's where we're at. Here's where we're going. Can you guys research that? Make sure everything has a purpose. And the benefit of those two groups working together is you have more people that share the vision.
And more heads that are thinking and planning, and hearts that are passionate, and
hands that are praying. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
It's so true. And again, I think a couple of the things that support this type of leadership, again, it comes from a desire. It comes from a desire that we want to make a God-sized difference in this area, and these families, these people, and these friends, and these neighbors. We want to, and we don't, or at least not as big as we want to yet. And we want it. So if you got to have that passion. If you don't have that passion, it doesn't matter. But if you do have that passion, then great. Then these teams can be really helpful. And then when they collaborate together, it's so cool. Some of the other tools that I find in missional parishes that we coach that are super, super helpful. One of them is having leadership team meetings, having the leadership team meetings are weekly, usually for about 2 hours each. Parish Pastoral Council meetings are usually for 2 hours each, quarterly. And then 3 times a year, we have a leadership summit, bringing together all the people in the finance council, all the people in the parish pastoral council, any of the staff and people that are running ministries. And we're speaking into them. We're letting them know how much we appreciate them as a leadership team. And we have a whole format for that. Maybe we'll talk about it in one of the other podcasts, but it's such a cool thing because it's such an energy boost. It's an opportunity to speak vision, but it's also an opportunity to give skills to leaders, and so that we're upping our game in terms of competency as an organization. And it's so fun. But that's a really good tool. But then also, again, mission. Have a mission every year, like at Lent or Advent or Pentecost, and bring people together prayerfully, and really be leaning into prayer at your leadership summits, at your missions. Those are all amazing. We would have, again, depends on the size of your church, we'd have an all-staff meeting once a month, where we would have beautiful time of worship and prayer and interceding for all the ministries. And we'd share wins and we'd share vision. And sometimes we'd work on different skill sets around leading. It wouldn't be the minutia of what everybody's doing, which made the meetings actually fun and people wanted to go and they were prayerful. So we were forming people in prayer. We were forming strong relationships between key members of our church. And so these are all other things that as you continue to be missional, so it's not all relying on a parish pastoral council. In so many churches in Canada, you have your parish pastoral council, you have your Knights of Columbus, and you have your Catholic Women's League. And that's like the only things that are going on in church. And then you have all your sacraments and your religious education. And people are leaving the church in droves. People are receiving the sacraments and never coming back. But we're all busier than a one-legged man at a butt-kicking contest. It's like, but we're not fruitful. And so as you dedicate yourself to fruitfulness, you're probably going to need to change your structure. As you change your structure, you're probably going to need to change your self-identity as a team or as a group. And then we're going to have to do it with a conscious sense of what kind of culture we're trying to build and how we want to treat each other and where we're going. So we want to be a church that matters. Why? Because I've lost so many friends, and I know you have too, and neighbors and people that don't know Christ, and more people come into the community and they're lonely and they're disconnected. And so we want to be a church that matters unequivocally. Why? Because people matter and we're losing them and the church is irrelevant and it's not good enough. So that's your why, that's your where. Perfect. Now let's figure out the what and the how. And so the Parish Pastoral Council can think about a plan, like where do we want to be in 5 years? And what are the systems? Like what format are we going to use to mobilize that, to give language to it? And again, the 5 systems are a really helpful way of doing that. You know, you could also use the APES, apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers, and what corporate ministries do we have that fit those? So there's different ways you can do it, but choose one and then build a plan around it that's consistent with the church you want to be, and then begin to make sure that on the other side, the day-to-day side, you have the right people in the right seats on the bus with the right attitudes who are working day in and day out in the culture that you want to bring about the results that you feel God's calling you to get.
Oh, that's really helpful. Yeah.
It's hard, but it's hopefully it brings some clarity. You know.
Yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to say as we finish up?
I'm just going to maybe use my iPad here, and I'm just going to draw a diagram for people that are watching this on YouTube, and the people that aren't, well, maybe we'll just explain it to you. Maybe that will be helpful. But I just want to talk a little bit into structure in terms of how this could work. So the P is your pastor. And then I'm going to put leadership team. So an L, an S, and a T. Those are people. And there could be another one on there. I wouldn't suggest there be any more than 5 collectively, no matter how big your church is. And so the pastor supports the leadership team. He's on the leadership team, but he supports each one of them individually. Then you have your chair of your Parish Pastoral Council. And you have your chair of your finance council. And I would ask that both of those chairs own the relationships, the unanimity of vision, all that stuff, like the effectiveness, the chemistry, own that on your team, and then support them once a month. And then in some cases, clergy team. Some churches have more than one clergy, and the clergy may not be on the leadership team. Just because you're ordained doesn't mean you're a great organizational leader. It doesn't. I'm stating the obvious, and that might be ghastly for some people, but we know that's true. And so it doesn't mean they're not supported. It doesn't mean they're not a really important part of the parish, and you do need to continue to speak into the team, because there's nothing more frustrating than for a layperson to hear different clergies preaching different things with different visions. It's a nightmare. And so you need unanimity of vision within your clergy team and in your preaching series. And so that pastor meets for 2 hours a week. And we used to meet for longer than that, but that's okay. So 2 hours a week with the leadership team, plus 1 hour a week with each of the leadership team members to talk about tactical things, because when tactical things come into leadership team meetings, it's boring and irrelevant. So you want to talk tactical one-on-one with people to support them in their ministries. But when you get together a leadership team member, you're not there to represent your particular ministry. You're there to think like a leader, share the responsibility of overall leadership of the pastor. Then to meet for 1 hour once a month with your chair, 1 hour once a month with the chair with your finance council, and then probably, between 1 and 2 hours per week with your clergy team. And so hopefully that structure is helpful. And again, not for everybody. Maybe that's something you're going to grow into eventually, but that gives a pastor, because imagine all the meetings and all the people that person is supporting. And so you can really see how a pastor has to get good at leadership, has to get good at supporting people, has to get good at multiplying people. And it's not what you do once that makes a difference. It's what you do over and over and over again that makes a difference. And so we need to invest disproportionately in the key people that God's put around you, that you've discerned, that are driving the vision. And so that's going to limit a lot of the other things that people probably think you should do as a priest, and maybe you think you should do as a priest. Your self-identity begins to shift because you're mobilizing people. Jesus invested disproportionately. He talks about 72 disciples at one point in Scripture. Well, he didn't invest in those guys as much as he invested in the 12. And he didn't invest in the 12 as much as he invested in Peter, James, and John. Jesus knew how to invest disproportionately in key people to create a movement of mercy and grace. And that's our responsibility as pastors. That's our responsibility as people who support the pastor. And this structure hopefully puts the Parish Pastoral Council in its... So the Parish Pastoral Council works in collaboration with the leadership team and the pastor. And the pastor is a part of all those. And they work together, but they have different roles. And so, but with the same attitude of support and desire to help. And so I hope that's been helpful. It is a bit confusing, but if we're struggling with fear, if we're struggling with jealousy, if we're struggling with resentment, it's okay. It's okay. Change often brings about those types of feelings. But I'm going to ask you, if you're one of those people, to be honest about it and pray into it. And then maybe go to the person, the pastor, or somebody else on the team and say, you know what? I have to be honest. I'm feeling really unheard or underappreciated or angry or confused. And I don't want to let those feelings override my opinion of you and our working relationship. But if I don't tell you, you're not going to know. And so because of the confusion, I'm feeling this way. Can we talk it out and work it out so that I understand? Because I don't want this to come between us, because I care about you. I care about the mission. I love Jesus and I love this church. Like, have that honest conversation. Don't create a team of naysayers around you and build up the loyal resistance for the pastor and the team. Work out your feelings. Don't give way to them. Don't feed those feelings that bring division in churches. Take those feelings to prayer. They're normal. They're human. I don't like it when I feel them, but I do. But have those conversations with people. Risk being vulnerable for the sake of unity, for the sake of mission. And just know that it's okay to experiment and try new things so that we can get better results to reach your kids, your grandkids, your friends, your neighbors, the people that have fallen away and the people that don't even know Jesus yet. We have a purpose.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Any closing thoughts from you, Lorraine?
No, not really. I think we've about covered it, haven't we? It's confusing.
So. Do we leave people more confused, or do you think?
I hope not. I really hope not. But I think I loved the way that you said it really is about who we're trying to reach and about fruitfulness. And that's the main thing. And I heard a lot around humility. It's not about me. It's about where we're going and how can we support, our community, our pastor and the people around us to all be rowing in that same direction. And it might look different in different places, but it's about fruitfulness and reaching those people that we love with the love of Jesus.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. And so if you're listening today and you're thinking that was helpful, then great. Send us a note. Tell us what was helpful, because this was a wonderful conversation. Clearly, you could tell it wasn't completely planned out, but they never are. These podcasts are conversations on leadership issues that hopefully will stimulate conversations in your head or your church and your relationships. But if there's anything that landed, that made sense, if it brought clarity, would you send us a note and let us know? Go to huntleyleadership.com. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to our newsletter, and we'll keep you posted of things that are coming out. But also, if this left questions, if it caused confusion, let us know that too, because we'd love to address it. And sorry if that's the case, but we would love to know. And if this has been helpful, then by all means, share it with people and continue the conversation. We've developed a course recently specifically for Parish Pastoral Councils. It's a 4-part video series that we did for a diocese. And if something like that might be helpful to your church, let us know, and we could tell you a little bit more about that offering that we have. But thank you for listening. It's been a fun conversation. Lorraine, I always love talking to you. I learned what playgroups are now in Australia. That's totally cool. And you've just got so much experience in the church helping people. And so whenever we have these conversations, I just find them a ton of fun. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
I want to encourage you, as you lead this week, be faithful to God and generous to others. See you next time. And remember, if you're still breathing, you are powered for impact.